So on behalf of everyone at the Midway and myself, I'd like to thank our panel for being here today, and all of you for coming to participate. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you all. Ken Harman is a gallerist and curator based in the San Francisco Bay Area. He is the owner and curator of Spoke Art and Hashimoto Contemporary Galleries on Sutter Street in San Francisco. Previously, Harman was the online editor for the internationally distributed arts publication High Fructose magazine. Mark Wolfe was born and raised in San Francisco and opened Urbis Artium Gallery in 2003. 2 years later, he moved to the 49 Geary building in downtown San Francisco, launching Mark Wolfe Contemporary, which just celebrated its 10th anniversary. Congratulations. The gallery represents artists in all media with a focus on painting and has participated in numerous art fairs in Miami, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco. Jen Rogers is the co-founder of Varnish Fine Art with Carrie Stevens, who have become known as art dealers curating provocative and skillfully executed contemporary artwork exhibitions. True to its mission, Varnish continues to be a lively and vital part of the Yerba Buena Arts District in downtown San Francisco and is a member of the San Francisco Art Dealers Association. And last, but certainly not least, Alix Sloan is an author, curator, consultant, and gallerist with over 20 years' experience in the arts. She regularly shares her expertise through speaking engagements and one-on-one consultations, helping artists focus their goals, create strategies, and understand what it takes to build and maintain a long-term career in the arts. And of course, she is the author of Launching Your Art Career, A Practical Guide for Artists, which is the topic of our conversation today. There are still chairs, so come take a seat. Alex, I'd love to start with you.
I'd like to thank Midway and thank Kelsey for having us and all of you for being here.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
And the panelists.
Yes. On the first page of your book, you stress the importance of recognizing that artists are their own business. Why is this important to recognize early in someone's career, even before, let's say, they start making money as an artist?
I think I felt the need to stress that at the beginning of the book because I know it's an unpleasant concept to think, I'm passionate about my work, I want to make beautiful, meaningful, intelligent, provocative work, and then to think, holy crap, I also have to figure out taxes. Unfortunately, it is what it is. If you want to live and thrive and survive as an artist, you're going to have to consider the business aspects of it. I have so many artist friends who kind of went out into the world not realizing that, and taxes being a perfect example, like, oh my God, I didn't put any money aside for that, or I didn't think about marketing. I had this big show and all these people showed up and I didn't get a mailing list together. How am I going to let them all know about my next show? So as depressing a thought as it can be, it's a really great way if you can just get your head around the fact that, okay, I am running a small business and my small business is supporting my creativity, then you can really build something. You can move along a little bit faster and maybe with less stressful surprises along the way. I think that's primarily what I was trying to stress. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
Oh, sure. Maybe because of that and keeping that in mind, it'll really help you to think of the business side as less of a necessary evil and more something that you can be creative with. You can partner with galleries or dealers. So it can actually be a rewarding and fun part of it.
It seems to me that social media can either be a huge asset or a detriment to an artist, and that kind of goes along with the self-representation of being your own business. Ken, you're known for your social media savvy, and you also mention it in your piece of advice at the end of the book. Can you delve into the most proactive ways artists can approach social media in representing themselves and what you touch on in your piece of advice on how not to use it?
Yeah. So a great thing about the book is there's about 50 or so 45 galleries, curators who have given a page of advice. And mine was, and this is something very interesting that I've noticed the last year or so, is artists have been submitting to us via our social media. So we'll do an Instagram post or a Facebook post, and an artist will say, hey, check out my portfolio, here's a link. Which isn't really ideal. It's not necessarily the most professional way to go about it. But it also shows the changing world that we live in which social media is becoming, for many people, the way that you communicate with others, and the way that, as a gallery, we reach out to a lot of our collectors and a lot of our fans. So, you know, it is incredibly important, but it also has to be worked with a little bit of finesse as well.
And you use social media to your advantage. You have a great social media presence. Are there ground rules? Are there do's and don'ts? Do you have any advice for people representing themselves or their own business?
Yeah. Well, you know, first off, every sort of platform is different. You know, Twitter is very different than Tumblr, which is very different than Instagram, and they all serve different purposes and all appeal to different demographics. So Twitter tends to, in my personal experience, be used mostly by collectors or curators, you know, who are, let's say, over the age of 40, Instagram more in the 20s, et cetera, et cetera. One thing I did think was actually really interesting was we went to a talk last week, and it was a curator from the SF MoMA, and she was asked by an audience member what social media channels she uses. And she said that she doesn't use Instagram, which was really interesting to me because I use it a lot. So I guess that shows that there is also these many different routes. Everyone uses it for different reasons and in different ways, and some prefer others and some prefer don't. So maybe, you know, if you're looking at a specific gallery or at a specific institution, see what they're using and see how you can participate in the conversation on that platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Do any of you use Instagram or Facebook to view portfolios at this point, or is it still kind of just a social platform for you? You'd rather see a website?
I don't.
It's good to know.
I would add something to this social media thing. It's a really great way to engage, particularly in San Francisco. You guys are surrounded by so many wonderful creative people, but there are wonderful creative people all over who may have similar interests to you. It's a great opportunity to get involved in communities, online communities that might have similar interests to you that aren't necessarily about artists. Maybe you're a doll collector, or maybe I have an artist who's, you know, obsessed with handlebar mustaches, and he follows those kinds of groups. And it's a way to sort of network with people who maybe it's not other artists specifically, but it's people who might take an interest in your work and engage with you and give you feedback. Yeah, maybe they'll buy something, maybe they won't, but it's a great way to engage with other artists and other people who you can have a camaraderie with and get feedback from and interact with in a really positive way. So I think that's been helpful for some artists, particularly artists who live in small areas and don't have as much of that connection as they might like to get.
So use it more as a community builder
Yeah.
than an outlet.
And just a promotional tool.
Yeah. Jen, you mentioned in your piece of advice at the end of the book that we all can't make a living solely creating the purest form of art, which is, everyone knows that's true. And you advise that artists take supplementary jobs that encourage and inspire their artistic practice. What is the best example you've seen of this, and how does an artist know what a useful day job is and what's a waste of time?
What is the best example? Well, they're all great, first off. But probably the best known artist, or at least pop icon that we're working with, is Ed Hardy. So we're opening the show here that we're presenting next month. And he started as a tattoo artist, and at the time that he started in 1967, literally no one on the planet thought of it as an art form. So just through sheer determination, really exploring the craft, believing in it, tattooing until 2008. So here's somebody who everybody's heard of, and he was still doing a side job. And he still has other side jobs as well. So it really, really, really doesn't matter how famous you are. If you love doing it, don't stop doing it. He's also produced 30 books. He's written art history books of really little-known crafts. He's continuing to promote other forms. So basically, if what you like to do, you can make money doing and do your fine art, just keep doing it. So, yeah, and I can't think of too many people who have houses in Beverly Hills and don't do something else, but they might have something that they do that we don't know about. So.
Do any of the artists that you guys work with have specific jobs that you find useful with their practice?
Teachers.
Teachers.
Yeah, so teaching artists is the first thing that comes to mind. Great. Play microphone. As longtime art dealers, what's the best practice, in your opinion, for an artist to approach a gallery? I know this is a very popular question that was brought up at the La Luz panel discussion. What are proactive ways, and what are the tendencies that you find are distracting or unhelpful when an artist approaches a gallery?
Mark on that one.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think the least likely to succeed idea is to walk into a gallery unannounced with your portfolio, followed closely by going into a booth at an art fair with your portfolio and striking up a conversation with the dealer who probably thinks you're a collector, and then after a 10-minute conversation, you offer to show your portfolio. I can't think of a time where that's ever fostered sufficient goodwill with me that even if the artwork was something I'd otherwise be interested in, it's such an invasion, I feel, of the decorum of being in a gallery or being in an art fair booth that it's almost never going to succeed, and I just highly recommend that you never do that. On the flip side, I can't emphasize enough, I think, the value of trying to participate in whatever community of artists, art dealers, art writers, curators that is around you, and approaching dealers through that community, through that network. Walking in blind, sending in a portfolio with a cover letter, as a mass mailing is going to be far less likely to succeed than if you are introduced to a gallery by someone that perhaps already shows at that gallery, or is a friend of the gallerist, or is another dealer that the gallerist has a relationship with. I just, in my mind, the social network, whether it's online or in person, but I kind of think it's more effective in person, is how it works in the art world. And the older I get and the more I do this, the more that becomes really clear to me that it is about being in a community. It's about giving and receiving input, and the serendipitous moments where someone runs into someone else at some other event are far more likely to happen if you're an active participant in that enterprise. And so that's sort of where I would leave it, I guess.
The first answer you gave reminds me of something Jen said in her advice, which is that we're all in it together. And I think that when you're an artist, it's really easy to be like, oh, art dealer, artist. They're two separate things. But your job, my job, is to move artwork. So in those art fair situations, art gallery situations, that's your job, right? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to move other people's artwork. So it is. It's all comes together. Does anyone else have anything to add on the how we like to be approached tip?
That was very spot on.
Good. In San Francisco, we're lucky to be the home of the nation's oldest and largest open studios, hosted by Artspan, which is actually coming up in the beginning of October. As gallerists, how do you take part in open studios, ArtSpan or East Bay, and how do you suggest that artists take advantage of that community resource? Ken, do you want to start?
I'll actually pass it down that way.
Jen, do you want to start? I will say I'm not San Francisco based. My gallery was in New York, and I'm now based out of Los Angeles. And I don't have a hard space. I just do pop-ups and art fairs. But I love open studios. If you have an opportunity to be in a studio building that does open studios, I highly recommend it if you can swing it. It's a great opportunity, particularly for dealers who sometimes feel like we go to openings and maybe people know who we are and it's a little bit awkward and we might get approached. We can slide into open studios, do a whole building, see all sorts of stuff we would never see. We all got into it because we love art. So to be able to go and look at art and enjoy it in that way, meet some artists with no pressure, see how they work, see what's going on. It's really wonderful. Another thing that I did in New York a lot, and I haven't started doing in LA yet, but I will, is going to school. When schools have like their graduate open studios, I did that a lot too. I just think it's a great way you never know who's going to stumble through. It's also a really wonderful way to meet other artists and build a community of artists who will support you. So if you have that opportunity, I would say do it. If you don't have that opportunity, I would still encourage you to go to open studios, talk to other artists, say hello. It's a great way to build community. And specific to San Francisco, if any of you want to talk about that.
I would just add one thing, which is if you participate in open studios regularly on an annual or semi-annual basis, change up what you hang. Yeah. Because the dealers and others, we do remember, and we walk in, and there have been occasions where it's like, you have the exact same workup this year that you had last year. That doesn't mean you should get rid of the work, but maybe have it somewhere else. And so if a conversation is striking up, you're in a position to bring out some of the older work. But people have good visual memories in this business, and so always have something new up every time you participate in the studio would be my suggestion.
We actually have normally only gone to open studios in other cities, to be honest. So, I guess you could say we're going to open studios all the time, but not the formalized open studios. Mm-hmm. So, we're seeing as many as we can normally anyway. So when it comes time for the scheduled program, we usually have something else going on, to be honest. So.
That's fair. And I would also say, don't be discouraged if you participate in open studios and nobody asks you to be in a show or nothing comes of it. I've gone back to artist studios, a year later, and then seen more and different work that I also liked. Sometimes these things take a really long time to click. So, don't get discouraged. And I absolutely agree with Mark said about changing up the work.
My next question kind of segues in. What are other useful resources for artists in terms of institutions, public funding, nonprofits that you either look for artists within or use yourself, or can give advice to the audience about?
There's so many different resources out there. New American Paintings is a pretty good one. I don't pull a lot from it, but it is a submission-based publication. So that is definitely a good resource, and we have had some of our artists featured in New American Paintings, and I know a lot of dealers and curators do flip through that, so that could be an easy option with a good sort of national pool if you're looking for exposure.
If the question is resources that we as dealers use to
Artists, of course, want to know which resources to use that are going to get them noticed. So.
Yeah, I don't know if this counts as that type of resource, but residencies, any residency, even if it's not a non-residential residency, if it's something that basically gives you the opportunity, and I'm always going to come back to this, to participate in a small cohort of like-minded individuals, and to be able to withdraw from the rest of your life for a short period of time to do it. I can tell you that we certainly look at the Headland Center all the time, and we go down and we tour the Jurassic, and we get the newsletters and the information and follow on social media the various nationwide residencies as well. And so I think to the extent that you're in a position to participate in one of those, that's an avenue worth pursuing.
I think there are a lot of websites out there, artist opportunities, all sorts of things. There's a list in the book. And, but when I was going through that, it really made me realize when I was putting that together, I was like, okay, people who are going to buy this book and use this resource, they're going to be all over the place. And that's challenging because you should really, first and foremost, probably look into what applies specifically to you. So one thing that I will keep coming back to is research. You really need to research what's relevant to you. If you're a sculptor, if you're a photographer, whatever your medium is, whatever your life situation is. I just heard recently about a grant for parents of children who are at home. I never even knew a grant like that existed. Really, use that Google machine. Go ahead and put in all these parameters. Go to lists. That'll lead you to other lists. I don't encourage spending a lot of money submitting for shows. Unless you look at a show, I noticed that Ken actually curated a show at a fantastic local organization. There was a small fee, if I'm not mistaken, and it went to help fund a nonprofit. And if you want to get Ken's eyeballs on your work, what's a better way than to submit to a show like that? And there are so many lists and resources out there. It is really a matter of digging in and just looking for those kinds of things. I think. Residencies are fantastic. Everyone I know who's ever done a residency said they got a ton from it, community, feedback, everything. Also, I think a lot of artists are intimidated by grants, and I would really encourage you guys, it's a lot of work to submit to a grant, but if there's anything you think there's any chance you're gonna get, taking a day out of your life to do it is worth it if you get it. So I have a good friend, Rick Arloose, who's also in the book, who I think he applied to the Guggenheim 5 or 6 times, and he finally got it. He's an artist working out of Seattle, and he just kept submitting. It's different jurors every time, and let's face it, that's free money, and it's exposure. So I think don't underestimate any opportunity out there, and don't turn your nose up at opportunities. Don't spend a ton of money to submit to a bunch of stuff that people are obviously just making money off of, but certainly if it's a small museum, a nonprofit, a grant, a residency, those are the kinds of things that can be valuable. You may not get it, but if you do get it, it'll be totally worth that time. So I encourage all of that stuff.
And I think another great idea that you have in the book is donating for a cause that you care about. So that's a great way to support a cause that you love and also get your art in front of some very wealthy people that really want to buy work and support the artist and the cause. So I love that giving something to get back to begin with is a good idea. Also, don't turn your nose up at libraries. If they have work hanging, maybe ask them, how do I offer my portfolio for you to look at? Because thousands of people will see the work. You never know who. I mean, everybody's got a library card. So yeah, just keep your eyes open and ask around, ask your friends for any opportunities, no matter how little. Those are some pretty low impact ways to get started. Yeah.
Ken, how do you come to find artists you represent? Alix mentions in her book that artists or gallery representation isn't what it used to be, and I've noticed the same thing. Why is it still helpful for you, and how do you go about it?
So we represent only a handful of artists. Maybe about 20% of them or so are local, and the rest are national. For the most part, they're artists that, and there's so many different ways. Sometimes it's people that we just find and we pursue and we, sort of continually ask them to show with us, and we develop a rapport and a relationship, and it goes from there. Every now and again, it's a submission. We have had a couple artists who submitted blindly to our website, and we really loved the work. But ultimately, for us, a lot of it's just the chemistry. The relationship between a dealer and an artist is like any other relationship. Same with your spouse or your significant other or your sibling. And If you don't have chemistry and if you don't work well together, it doesn't matter how good the gallery is or how good the art is, it may not go anywhere. So for us, that plays a very, very big part.
It's so true. It is a relationship.
Same question. In the last probably 7 years, every single new artist that we've taken on has been someone that we've been introduced to by an existing artist or a friend of the gallery or a professor at an art school. So we stopped taking unsolicited submissions probably about 7 years ago. And I can't agree with Ken more on the point of chemistry. More than once, we've met artists that whose work we absolutely adored and were incredibly impressed with, but there was just something that didn't click on a personal level, and it didn't go anywhere. And there are other artists that I would say, candidly and in secret, that maybe they're in a little bit of their career has plateaued somewhat, and some of the strength of the work isn't what it used to be, but they're such good friends. And they weren't friends before they became gallery artists. They became friends as a result of being gallery artists. That we're not gonna leave them in the lurch. We're gonna keep working with them and try to work together to put together the next body of work that's gonna be successful.
Yeah, I think I was really surprised the other day. I was doing some research. There are still a lot of galleries out there that do take unsolicited submissions, and it was really nice to hear you say that, Ken, that you actually have found artists that way. It does happen. It does happen, so don't be intimidated. I don't really remember what the original question was. Yeah.
In your book, you talk about how representation is not.
Oh, yeah.
Explain why. Why is it different now?
I
Why is it so useful?
I think overall and in general, the art world is sort of a late adapter. The old model is you get with a gallery, that gallery represents you, and you're sort of married to that gallery. And that is, and you're not allowed to show anywhere else, and there's some competition. I think the internet has just opened that up a lot. There's a lot more opportunity to show with multiple galleries, more opportunity you don't have to jump right into bed with them as representation. You can just do a show or two with somebody, see how it goes, because again, the worst thing is if it's a bad fit. I've showed artists whose work I love and who I love as people, and I just don't have clients for the work. And so why, there's no value in that relation. We can still be friends, and I can still love your work, and I can come to your shows, and I can even buy it for myself. But if I can't sell it, I don't want to stop you from showing with anybody else. So, representation, I think, is less of a big deal. The most important thing nowadays is to just get your work out there, but also important to say, communicating with every gallery you work with so that they know what else you're up to, so they don't feel like you're sneaking around behind their back. Like, what are your expectations? I know I'm in a group show in 6 months. This other gallery asked me to do a group show. Just want to make sure you're cool with that, particularly if it's in the same city. But then if you find a wonderful relationship, representation can be fantastic because they'll take over all the business stuff for you and you can just breathe easy. And on the representation tip also, if you're not represented, it gives you opportunities to get a bunch of friends together and put on a show. If you're having trouble finding the right fit, you can find a space, rent a space, find someone you know who has a space, do a studio show, do something like that just to get people in and start getting your work out there. Any other thoughts on representation?
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that it's a different world. I mean, when we opened, our galleries, it was before Twitter and Facebook existed, or Instagram. So the whole world has changed since then, and the ways that the burden of marketing are distributed about, it's just a different landscape, so it kind of can make sense to not be represented for both parties.
Right.
It's good for the gallery and the artist sometimes.
As long as there's communication at all times, transparency and communication.
Communication is vital, and it goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, so you can keep the mic, since you have more technical.
Okay.
The pricing structure part is a very hot topic.
Yeah, it is.
You explain it really well in your book.
I think it's really hard and it's really heartbreaking, particularly when you're just starting out. Everybody, you pour your heart into this piece and it's the best piece you've ever made and you love it and you're so excited about it and you just want $1 million for it and you should get $1 million for it, but you're not going to. And it just is what it is. I am a firm believer, and I've seen it again and again and again and again. Your work does not work for you sitting in the studio, unless you're having a studio visit or open studios. You've got to get it out there. You've got to get it out there on somebody's office wall, in somebody's home, somebody's talking at a dinner party or at a cafe. Oh, I just bought the greatest piece of art. I love it so much. You've got to get it out there working for you. And the only way to do that is to make it affordable so people who love art can have it. So my sort of conversation that I have is, when you're just starting out, price your work as low as you can possibly price it, that if it sells, you won't just be heartbroken. And that's a decision that you have to make. You have to make that decision of what you're willing to do. And once you start getting your work out there, then you can start raising your prices. And then more people will see it and more people will take an interest in it. My policy is, once an artist is selling out a solo show or most of a solo show or mostly what they make, we raise the prices 10 to 20%. That's another big mistake I've seen, and this happened like right around 2005, 2006 when the economy was booming. A bunch of artists I know, their galleries got greedy, they raised their prices really high, the economy tanked. What happened? All those galleries just got new artists with cheaper prices. And all of these artists, you can't go back on your prices. Once your prices are at a certain point, you can't go back. So then you have to you're stuck waiting, and yes, you can give discounts and there's ways around it, but you're so much better off just getting your work out there. A show full of red dots, you may sell more work and actually make less money, but it means for the next show, more people will be excited, more people will come, you'll sell more work because everybody wants what they can't have. Everybody wants what everybody else has. So if you can sort of get your mind around that, I think it can be really valuable. And then not everybody is a fan of this system. I am a fan of the per linear inch. It's a very old-fashioned way to price flat work, which is length plus width, not times, but plus, times the dollar amount. So for instance, if your piece is 20 inches by 20 inches and your prices are at $20 a linear inch, then that's 20 times 20 is 40, 40 times 20, that's 800. So that can be a really helpful way just for you and your dealer to wrap your brain around sort of where your prices are. When pieces get really big, they get too cheap. And when they're really small, they get too expensive. But everything in the middle, it's just a great way to be like, okay, I've been at $30 a linear inch for a while now, everything's selling, maybe let's bump up to 33. And then just round up to the nearest amount. That is, all that's in the book. But it's worked really, really well for me. I have an artist who's at $100 a linear inch. Everything he's making is selling. His next show, we're gonna do 110. And then we can just look at the pieces and be like, okay, that comes out to $46.90, we'll make it $4,800 or $4,700. And it really helps you to feel like across the board you're being somewhat consistent with your pricing. And when you raise it, it can help you to just take those little bumps. But I do recommend taking those little bumps slowly and starting at a price where people can buy, own, enjoy, connect with your work, love your work, come back to buy more, tell their friends about it. It's the best possible way that your work can be advertisement for you, is by being out in the world. Anybody else?
I mean, if you want to continue on that topic of consistency with price work, something that you said, which I find that artists are sometimes surprised about, is that if you're selling at a new studio, that doesn't mean that it's half off.
Yeah.
Why?
Your prices have to, that's really simple. You're just going to piss people off. You got to have your prices the same everywhere. If I as a gallerist sell a piece for $1,200 and then someone comes to your studio and sells for $600, the person who finds out that someone else bought it for $600 is pissed. Why would anybody ever buy something from a gallery if they can get it for cheaper? And I know sometimes there might be like a certain show, maybe at a nonprofit, or where the splits are different. So your temptation is to price it a little bit lower so you're still getting the same amount of money. You really have to price your work consistently, across the board. Always consistent, always consistent. And if you're working with more than one gallery, you got to make sure that those galleries are either in communication with each other or you're giving them prices that are the same. And if they come back to you and want to change those prices, raise those prices, that you have a communication across the board. I have run into that where another gallery is selling an artist a little bit better than I am and they want to raise the prices, but then I've got my prices where they are, and someone contacts me, asks me what I have available, I give them the prices. The other gallery's pissed at me because I'm low, undercutting them. So that's where communication comes in also. But it's really important to keep the prices consistent. If you sell something out of your studio for the same price as the gallery, you just get more money. And if you are selling out of the studio, you do need to be super clear on your relationship with the gallery. Is that, for instance, if you have a solo show and the work comes down, even if the gallery doesn't still hold on to that work, there's usually an expectation that they can sell that work for another 3 to 6 months afterwards. So again, communication, making sure everybody's clear. Just emailing the gallery, hey, I'm having open studios, I'm super psyched, I hope you'll come. These are the prices I'm thinking about selling, I just want to make sure that's cool with you. If there's pieces that were in a show with them recently, I'll give you a cut. And we all, I think people think that gallerists and dealers, you might be bothering them. We would way rather you ask a question than have it be uncomfortable or awkward or feel like there was any sort of a problem. I think everybody can agree with that, right? Yeah.
Ken and Jen both have printing as part of their businesses. Can you delve into why is this an important part of your business and how artists can approach, are there any do's and don'ts, any ground rules?
A really good ground rule is if someone produces a print for you, don't go off and produce the same print somewhere else. Okay, because the idea is if it's a limited edition, that this particular size and this piece and this, this is it. There are only these 50. So if they start popping up somewhere else, that's just like a hanky deal. And that can happen. That's something to watch out for with bronze too. Those are editions as well. And, so you can look for a foundry stamp and know, okay, this is official. Much like that foundry stamp, you can have a certificate of authenticity is a really good idea to accompany your print. And that way you've got a signature on there or an embossed stamp from the printer, a signature from the estate or the artist. So yeah, don't do that. But of course, if you have a print that you want to do on your own and nobody else has done it, by all means go for it. It's a great way to make some extra money and have a low price point for artists. It can really add up. I mean, an edition of 50 or 100, all those $250 or $50, it adds up. So, and it makes it possible for people who don't have a lot of money to afford something. So, yeah.
Yeah, and open studios, that's a great idea, is just making a print. There's lots of local printers you can go to. Make a print of a piece that can be inexpensive, that can be editioned, that you feel like might be popular, and you can, just sell them for $50 right there and make some extra money.
Yeah, I'm a very big fan of limited edition prints, and a lot of that is, we work with a lot of emerging artists who in turn have a lot of emerging collectors, and for an art collector or for an established art collector, for somebody who's been collecting art for a long time, spending $500 on a painting is nothing. I mean, that's nothing. Spending less than $10,000 on a painting is nothing. But if you're an emerging collector, that's a lot of money. That's your rent for the month. That's your food for 2 weeks. And the $40 option or the $50 option or the $100 option is just so much easier. And it's a great way to get emerging collectors for your emerging art, and eventually, much like, artists who are just starting out eventually become established, hopefully, and collectors who are starting out, they start out with $50 pieces, and 2 years later they're buying $500 pieces, and 10 years later they're buying $5,000 pieces, and it just keeps going. So for me, limited editions represent a very large chunk of our business, and I'm a very big fan of them. And I think that they're great for the artist. I think they're great for the collector. Some people disagree with that, but that's how we do it.
It's like exhibiting in the cafe. It's another way to get that image in someone's home seen by another person.
And you can actually make more money too, which is really interesting. So good story. One of my very first shows, we had an artist make a painting. And it was a great painting. It was maybe $2,000 to $3,000. We sold it, very happy. And we then decided to do, there was so much interest in this particular image that we decided to make a print of it. And we sold 200 prints at $50 each, and they sold out in a week. So we had this $2,000 painting, but $10,000 in print sales. So at that point, selling the painting didn't really even matter. We had made so much more money selling the print, which is it's sort of an interesting world we live in which that's even a possibility and a great revenue stream if you're an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one last question, and then I'd like to open the questions up to the audience. Mark, in your in your piece of advice in the back of the book, you say something that really resonated with me, and I'm sure with a lot of people in the audience. You say that remember that the history of art has been, is, and will remain one giant inclusive conversation among dedicated individuals. And the reason that this resonated is because the reason our people are here today is because creating a community in the arts is so important. And you've touched on that a few times in this conversation. One way to do it is open studios, building that community. One way to do it is residency programs. If you could anecdotally talk about how you've built your community here, and as a native San Franciscan, how you've seen the arts community change here, and how as dedicated members of the art community we can foster a better change.
In 10 words or less. Well, it's a good cautionary tale, perhaps, because when I started, I think, labored under the delusion that if I just opened a space and hung good work, the crowds would come and the success would come. And I did that for several years and always sort of scratched my head as, why isn't this taking off the way I anticipated? I've got great work, I've got a great space. Hey, I bought an ad in Art Forum. Doesn't that mean, haven't I done everything I needed to do? And it wasn't until probably about the third or fourth year in business that I started making a conscious effort to go to other galleries' openings. Or to stop, actually, I take that back. Going to other galleries, not during the opening, so that I could actually strike up a conversation with whoever was sitting at the desk, which led to more and more, I want to say, friendships, quite honestly, or at least cordial relationships of mutual respect. And I also found that there was a lot of giving that I wasn't doing, that I should have been doing, which was supporting other artists, other dealers, other art world professionals. And we haven't talked about that much today, but the writers, the publishers of the large and small publications in the city, the curators, and a great sort of unsung cohort of people are the teachers at the art schools, most of whom are artists themselves. They are a fantastic resource. They really need support too. And I just found that by making a conscious effort to participate, stuff just happened. Not necessarily deliberately on my part. It wasn't like, okay, now I'm going to go to 10 openings, and then I'm going to ask 14 questions, and then I'm going to find an artist. Stuff just kind of happened by virtue of participating and being willing to share, to give feedback freely and generously. Buy an artist a drink, stuff like that. Have conversations, and if you encounter someone who doesn't want to talk about art, then you probably do something else with them. It's really easy to find people in San Francisco who will talk with you for hours about art, with or without alcohol. And so I guess that's sort of the essence of what I was trying to convey in the blurb for the book. So.
Does anyone else want to share a story of how they developed their community?
I would say I moved to New York to open a gallery with my cousin who passed away. Sad story, but unfortunately, that was what happened. But the gift that she gave me was an entire community of people she had built over 20 years. So I had this amazing experience where I moved to New York all by myself. I was, I had 4 suitcases and $100 in my bank account. I was terrified. And these amazing people like invited me to their studios and invited me to their homes and were cool. I had, a friend through a friend who knew someone who had a gallery, and I went over to her opening and said hello, and she ended up being one of my best friends in the world. And I am grateful to this day for that. And every single friggin' phone call that I got when I moved to New York, or email that I got, my cousin's moving to New York, will you have coffee with them? I'm like, yes, I will, because that really, really, really matters. It really matters just to have someone to talk to, and did I ever end up showing any of these people? I don't think any of them, but at least, galleries do refer to other galleries. I was really fortunate to build that relationship in New York, and it was this really clear and specific experience. I went on to open the gallery by myself, and I'm still friends with many of the people I met through her, some of whom I showed, some of whom I didn't, some of whom ended up in the book, some didn't. But I think that, and moving back to LA, I got on the phone and just everybody I had lost touch with or hadn't spoken to, and it's just really important. And sometimes not to be shy, sometimes to be like, you don't want to bug people, but hey, I know someone emailed me recently and was like, I'm in Seattle, I know you're friends with this person, and we have this other person in common. If I go into the gallery, can I use your name? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Feel free to say we have a friend in common. That's fine. Just, by cultivating a relationship, you never know what's going to happen. So I do think it's incredibly important. And to Mark's point, going to other people's shows, because they will remember it and they will show up at your show. Going to every group show you're in, meeting other artists, remembering them, showing up to shows that they're in, just continuing to be supportive and create a community. People will remember nobody wants an empty show. Then they'll come to your show. It makes a big difference, and before you know it, a year or two in, you're like, wow, this is amazing, this is great, I've got all this community around me, and it makes a big difference. Anybody else? Questions from the audience?
Just a little side note, it is totally true. I mean, the community thing is so important, but there is almost this weird sort of paradox, especially with artists, in which some of the greatest and best artists that I know hate going out and are incredibly antisocial and don't want to be in public. Maybe they don't drink, maybe they don't like big crowds, maybe they should be in the studio working, right? But with that said, the community thing is important, and if you do have a good community when your show comes around, there'll be a good community there to support you as well. So sometimes you just have to get over that hump.
Yeah.
I would just add, I think that the community part is perhaps more critical in the provinces out here in San Francisco than it might be in New York, where I think it'd be much more, I can't back this up with data, but it seems to me someone who hated crowds, who didn't get out there and just hunkered down in the studio and made work, would be at least a bit more likely to meet some measure of recognition if they were based in New York City, just because there's just so many trillions of eyes on everybody. But if you're out here in San Francisco, I think the community, participating in the community is that much more important.
I just have one. Yeah, and one thing that I'm going to add is that you never know who is going to end up being your ally later. When I met my business partner, she was my boss at the Bronx Foundry that I worked at. So it was the first .com rise in the 90s, and I had to live on a fishing boat. And I was just like the minion, pouring the bronze and working in the wax room. And one of my heroes became someone that we represent now. So the fact that he was so kind and supportive back then to someone who really shouldn't have mattered to a lot of other people made a huge difference.
Yeah.
So
you never know.
just be nice to everybody.
Yeah.
And if you're not, then just try to cultivate an attitude of kindness and think of your interactions with the feeling that you're leaving the person with.
Yeah, I would say that it is really important to be, I have seen artists treat interns and, disrespectfully, and I always think in my head, that person's gonna be a curator of a museum someday and you're gonna be sorry. Like you really, you just never know. People change jobs all the time, and there's a lot of value in just with openness and kindness, being cool to everyone, because people do remember, for sure.